Log date, Galactic Standard Year 3476, Day 127. There are moments in every professor's career when they question their life choices. For me, that moment arrived precisely at 0900 hours when 3 human students walked into my xenobiology classroom at the Galactic United Academy. I, Professor Crick's Bluescale, had taught countless species over my 200 years of service. But humans? This was a first, and not one I had particularly volunteered for. "Welcome, welcome," I announced, my secondary vocal cords vibrating with forced enthusiasm as my scales shifted from their usual calm azure to a slightly anxious teal. "Please take your seats wherever you feel safe." The humans, Sarah Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, and Tommy Parker, according to my roster, glanced at each other with those strange mouth curves they call smiles. They seemed amused by my discomfort, which only made me more uncomfortable. Now, let me explain something about the Galactic United Academy. We pride ourselves on being the most prestigious educational institution in the known universe. Our admission standards are higher than a Venetian cloud whale's flight path, and our facilities are state-of-the-art. But this year, someone in the administration, probably that over-enthusiastic Dean Sparklefrond, decided we needed to demonstrate our commitment to diversity by accepting students from Earth. Earth. Just saying the name makes my scales ripple. A death world with gravity that would crush most sentient species, weather patterns that could only be described as violently bipolar, and an ecosystem where everything either eats something else or is actively trying not to be eaten. "Professor," Sarah Chen raised her hand, interrupting my internal monologue. "Your scales are turning purple. Are you all right?" I quickly composed myself, watching as my other students, a delightful mix of crystalline beings, gas-form entities, and various tentacled species, shifted away from the humans like particles in a magnetic field. "Perfectly fine, thank you for your concern," I responded, my voice only cracking slightly. "Now, as I was about to say, this semester we'll be studying comparative biology across galactic species. And thanks to our new guests, we'll have first-hand insights into Class 12 planetary life forms." Tommy Parker grinned at this slip-up. These humans, I swear they can smell fear, although given their predatory ancestry, they probably can. Marcus Rodriguez raised his hand next. "Professor Bluescale, will we be having any practical demonstrations? Back on Earth, our biology classes were very hands-on." The way he said hands-on made my third heart skip a beat. The rest of the class collectively shuddered, causing a symphony of rustling leaves, clicking mandibles, and wobbling gelatinous forms. "We'll follow the standard curriculum," I declared firmly, though my scales betrayed me by flickering to a nervous yellow. "Which reminds me, next week will be our annual Companion Species Presentation Day. Each student will have the opportunity to showcase their planet's domestic life forms." The moment those words left my mouth, I saw the 3 humans exchange looks that could only be described as mischievously delighted. And that, dear colleagues, was when I realized I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The Committee for Interspecies Education would definitely be hearing about this in my next report, assuming, of course, I survived until then. The week leading up to Companion Species Presentation Day was, to put it mildly, a test of my professional composure. The rumours spreading through the Academy's crystalline halls would have made my ancestors molt in terror. "I heard humans keep miniature apex predators in their sleeping quarters," whispered Zoop, a gaseous student who turned a particularly worried shade of green during our preparation discussions. "They call them cats." "That's nothing," Blingle chittered through their mandibles, all 6 eyes blinking rapidly. "My cousin's roommate's friend told me they have these beasts called dogs that descended from pack hunters." Pack hunters? I tried to maintain order, really I did. Now, students, let's not get carried away with speculation. I'm sure our Earth colleagues will bring perfectly reasonable companions. My scales, however, had developed an embarrassing habit of shifting to emergency red every time I caught the humans whispering among themselves. The preparations for presentation day were proceeding normally, at least among the non-human students. Flutterspot proudly announced they would bring their beloved crystal moth, a creature whose most dangerous feature was its tendency to shed sparkly dust when excited. Another student, a gelatinous being named Wobble, was planning to showcase their pet gravity bubble, a completely harmless entity that simply floated around making pleasant popping sounds. But those three humans, they kept exchanging those predatory grins whenever anyone asked about their presentations. Sarah Chen would just pat her datapad mysteriously and say, "Oh, Mr. Whiskers can't wait to meet everyone." The way she said it made it sound like this Mr. Whiskers had teeth, lots of teeth. I tried bringing my concerns to the faculty board, but they were astoundingly unconcerned. Dean Sparklefrond actually had the audacity to laugh, a sound like tinkling crystal wind chimes that made me want to molt right there in the staff room. "My dear Cricks," they chimed, their leafy appendages waving dismissively, "you're being paranoid. These are civilized students from a Species Recognition Council-approved planet. What's the worst they could bring? A vegetation sample?" I attempted to explain that Earth's vegetation samples could be carnivorous, but nobody seemed to take that seriously either. The xenobiology department head, Professor Luminous Cloud, just pulsed condescendingly and suggested I take a vacation. Meanwhile, the humans were busy making mysterious preparations. I caught Marcus Rodriguez discussing something called treats with Tommy Parker, and the word leash came up more than once. When I researched these terms in the galactic database, the results were unsettling. "Professor Bluescale," Tommy approached me after class 3 days before the presentation. "Quick question. What's the Academy's policy on scales? Like shed ones?" "Shed scales?" My own scales flickered in confusion. "Why would that be relevant?" "Oh, no reason," he replied with that unnervingly wide human smile. "Just wanted to make sure Noodle won't cause any problems." Noodle. The name haunted my dreams that night. What kind of creature would humans name Noodle? Given Earth's track record, probably something with venomous spikes and multiple rows of teeth. The day before presentations, I overheard Sarah Chen making soothing noises into her communication device. "Don't worry, Mr. Whiskers. Tomorrow you get to make so many new friends." The predatory glee in her voice sent shivers down all 3 of my spinal columns. I spent that evening updating my emergency protocols and ensuring the classroom's containment fields were fully charged. I even went as far as requisitioning some extra personal shield generators from the physics department, claiming they were for a demonstration. That night, I sent what might have been my final message to the Committee for Interspecies Education. If you're reading this, and something has gone horribly wrong during tomorrow's presentations, I want it noted that I expressed concerns about allowing Deathworlder pets on campus. Also, please make sure my collection of rare mineral samples goes to the Academy Museum. They're in the 3rd drawer of my desk, behind the emergency tranquilizer darts. Looking back, I really should have ordered more tranquilizer darts. The morning of Companion Species Day dawned like any other, 3 of our system's suns rising in perfect harmony, casting a peaceful rainbow glow across the Academy's crystal spires. If only I had known how quickly that peace would shatter. The presentations began smoothly enough. Flutterspot released their crystal moth, which danced through the air leaving trails of sparkly dust that made several gaseous students sneeze in geometric patterns. The moth's most aggressive action was attempting to mate with the classroom's floating light fixtures. "Thank you, Flutterspot," I said, my scales maintaining a professional shade of blue. "A wonderful example of harmless bioluminescent companionship." Next came Wobble's gravity bubble, which bounced happily around the room, making those adorable popping sounds that usually help lower my blood pressure. Usually. Today I couldn't help but notice the humans in the back row looking distinctly unimpressed. Sarah Chen actually yawned. The audacity. "Professor," Marcus Rodriguez raised his hand, that unsettling smile still plastered across his face. "When do we get to show our companions?" "Patience," I replied, my scales betraying me with a flash of nervous yellow. "We still have, let me see, 17 more presentations of various non-threatening species to go through." Those 17 presentations passed far too quickly. We saw everything from photosynthetic dance spores to a telepathic cloud that could only project happy thoughts. All perfectly reasonable, perfectly safe companion species that had evolved on perfectly reasonable, non-death trap planets. Then came Sarah Chen's turn. "Before you begin," I interrupted as she stood up, "I must remind everyone that the classroom's emergency containment fields are fully functional, and the exit is, as always, clearly marked with bioluminescent signs." Sarah just smiled wider. "Don't worry, Professor, Mr. Whiskers is very well behaved." She pulled out what looked suspiciously like a portable containment unit. The class collectively held their breath. Those who had breath to hold, anyway. Even the gaseous students compressed themselves anxiously. "Everyone," Sarah announced proudly, "meet Mr. Whiskers." The creature that emerged from the containment unit was small, smaller than I expected, covered in fur, an immediate red flag, nothing civilized has fur, with pointed ears, retractable claws, another red flag, and eyes that seemed to contain the very essence of predatory calculation. What is that?" Zoop gasped, their gaseous form condensing in fear. "This is a cat," Sarah explained as the creature surveyed the room with obvious disdain. "He's a domestic short hair, and he's the sweetest little guy ever." Sweet, sweet. I watched in horror as Mr. Whiskers stretched, revealing an impressive array of needle-sharp claws and teeth that would make a Rigelian razor beast jealous. "Those are hunting instruments," Blingle pointed out, their mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "Oh, these." Sarah scratched under Mr. Whiskers' chin, causing the beast to emit a low rumbling sound. "Don't worry about them. He only uses them on his toys. And maybe the occasional space mouse." Space mice? We had an infestation. When did that happen? And more importantly, why did this information seem to make Mr. Whiskers look even more interested in his surroundings? The cat gracefully leaped onto my desk, and proceeded to do what I can only describe as a threat display, cleaning its murder weapons while maintaining direct eye contact with me. My scales cycled through so many colors of terror that several students later asked if I was attempting to communicate in binary. "As you can see," Sarah continued, apparently oblivious to the psychological warfare her pet was conducting, "cats make wonderful companions. They're clean, independent, and incredibly affectionate when they want to be." Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to demonstrate affection by headbutting my trembling hand. I froze, convinced these were my final moments. The entire class watched in horrified fascination as the predator rubbed against me, marking me as, its territory, its next meal. "He likes you," Sarah beamed. "Listen, he's purring." That rumbling sound had a name, and it was supposed to be positive. I made a mental note to update the Academy's xenobiology textbooks with this terrifying information, assuming I survived the next few minutes. "Would anyone like to pet him?" Sarah asked the class. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every non-human student somehow managed to press themselves against the far wall, regardless of their physical form. Even the gaseous students solidified slightly in fear. Mr. Whiskers, apparently unimpressed with this reaction, proceeded to curl up on my desk calendar directly on top of today's date. A power move if I ever saw one. "Don't worry," Sarah said soothingly, though her barely suppressed laughter somewhat undermined the comfort. "This is actually a very typical first reaction to cats. But I promise once you get to know them, they're amazing companions. Mr. Whiskers even kills harmful insects." "It kills things?" Flutterspot's crystal moth quickly dove for cover behind the light fixtures. "Only small things," Sarah assured everyone, which was possibly the least reassuring statement I'd ever heard in my 2 centuries of teaching. I was about to call for a brief recess and possibly file an emergency evacuation request when Marcus Rodriguez stood up, grinning from ear to ear. "That was great, Sarah. Now who's ready to meet Rex?" The way he said it, combined with Mr. Whisker's suddenly alert expression, told me that somehow, impossibly, things were about to get even more interesting. I really should have ordered more tranquilizer darts. If I thought Mr. Whiskers had caused a stir, I was woefully unprepared for what Marcus Rodriguez had in store for us. The containment unit he brought forward was significantly larger than Sarah's, and it was moving. "Everyone," Marcus announced with evident pride, "meet Rex, my German Shepherd." The creature that bounded out of the containment unit was enormous by classroom standards. With powerful legs, alert ears, and sweet celestial bodies, the most impressive array of teeth I'd seen outside of a natural history museum. "Apex Predator!" screamed Zoop, instantly evaporating in panic and condensing on the ceiling. Rex, apparently excited by the sudden movement, let out a booming woof that sent Blingle spinning into emergency defense mode, mandibles clicking at hyperspeed. Mr. Whiskers, still lounging on my desk calendar, merely opened one eye and gave Rex what I swear was a dismissive sneer. No, you've got it all wrong," Marcus laughed, holding on to something called a leash that seemed to be the only thing preventing the beast from investigating every corner of my classroom. "Rex is a good boy. Here, watch this. Rex, sit."
To my utter amazement, the predator obeyed, planting its hindquarters on the floor while maintaining what can only be described as an eager smile. A smiling predator. The concept alone made my scales shift to a previously undiscovered shade of panic.
"See, he's trained," Marcus explained proudly. "Rex, give me your paw." The beast lifted one of its massive feet, adorned with claws, I noted hysterically, and placed it in Marcus's hand. Several crystalline students vibrated at frequencies usually associated with extreme distress. "Would anyone like to throw his ball?" Marcus held up a small spherical object. "Projectile weapon!" Flutterspot screeched, their crystal moth diving for cover in someone's gelatinous form. That's when Tommy Parker decided this was the perfect moment for his presentation. "Speaking of balls," he said, reaching for his containment unit, "wait until you meet Noodle." Remember how I mentioned earlier that the name Noodle had haunted my dreams? Reality proved far worse than any nightmare. The creature Tommy withdrew was long, scaly, a mockery of my own dignified scales, and moved in ways that defied both physics and common decency. "This is a ball python," Tommy announced, as if that combination of words was supposed to make sense. The chaos that ensued will forever be recorded in Academy history. Zoop, still on the ceiling, began raining down in panic droplets. Blingle attempted to achieve orbit using their desk as a launch pad. The gelatinous students merged into one large, quivering mass of terror. Even Mr. Whiskers sat up and took notice, though mostly to look offended at the presence of another creature with scales. "Containment breach!" someone shouted, though it was hard to tell who threw the pandemonium. "Please remain calm." I tried to restore order, my voice cracking across 3 different octaves. "The situation is completely under— Rex, no!" The German Shepherd, excited by all the commotion, had decided this was the perfect time to investigate the gelatinous mass of students. His enthusiastic approach sent them splashing in all directions, which in turn excited Mr. Whiskers, who finally abandoned my desk to chase the moving globs. "Look how well they're playing together." Sarah beamed, completely misinterpreting the situation. Meanwhile, Tommy was still trying to educate us about Noodle. "Ball pythons are constrictors," he explained helpfully, as if that word wouldn't send every being in the room into a new level of panic. "Constructor?" asked one brave crystalline student. "No, constrictor. It means they squeeze their prey." The crystalline student promptly shattered into emergency fragments. "But Noodle only eats pre-killed mice," Tommy hastily added. "She's really very gentle." Mr. Whiskers, hearing the word mice, suddenly lost interest in the gelatinous students and turned his predatory gaze toward Tommy and Noodle. Rex, noticing Mr. Whiskers' attention shift, decided he too needed to investigate this new situation. "Professor," Sarah said calmly, while I watched my classroom descend into complete chaos, "I think Mr. Whiskers might need a snack break." A snack break? A snack break? As if watching one predator consume sustenance would somehow calm the situation. "Everyone, please!" I tried again, my scales now cycling through colours so rapidly I was probably triggering seizure warnings. "Return to your natural forms and... Blingle, please come down from the light fixture. Zoop, reconstituting yourself would be appreciated. Rex, that gelatinous puddle is not a drinking fountain." It was at this exact moment that Dean Sparklefrond chose to conduct their surprise classroom inspection. They floated through the door, leafy appendages waving cheerfully, then froze at the sight before them. The scene must have been quite impressive. Me, standing on my desk. When did I get up here? Scales strobing like a malfunctioning emergency beacon. Rex happily chasing gelatinous students across the floor. Mr. Whiskers stalking something in the ceiling tiles. Noodle contentedly wrapped around Tommy's arm. And various students in various states of matter scattered throughout the room. "Professor Bluescale," Dean Sparklefrond chimed faintly, "I see the cultural exchange is proceeding." Before I could respond, Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to pounce on whatever he'd spotted in the ceiling, bringing down a shower of ceiling tiles. One thoroughly startled Zoop, and what appeared to be an actual space mouse. "Good kitty," Sarah exclaimed. Rex barked in excitement, sending the recently reconstituted Blingle back into emergency orbit. "See?" Tommy said brightly, as Noodle flicked her tongue at the chaos. "Everyone's getting along great." I made a mental note to update my will, just as soon as I figured out how to get down from my desk without attracting the attention of any of the Earth predators. Perhaps retirement wasn't such a bad idea after all. In the aftermath of what I now call the Great Classroom Chaos, something remarkable began to happen. Once we had helped Blingle down from their orbital trajectory, reassembled our crystalline student from their emergency fragments, and convinced Zoop to stop hiding in the ventilation system, the humans decided it was time for what they called proper introductions. "The thing is," Sarah explained, while Mr. Whiskers proudly displayed his captured space mouse, "humans have always had a special relationship with predators. We didn't just tame them, we befriended them." Befriended? Zoop condensed enough to form the word, still maintaining a safe distance near the ceiling. "But they have murder implements." "Watch this," Marcus said softly, kneeling beside Rex. The large predator immediately rolled onto his back, exposing his vulnerable underside. "This is trust. Rex knows I would never hurt him, and I know he would never hurt me. We're family." The class collectively leaned forward, fascination beginning to override their terror. Even I found my scales shifting to a curious shade of turquoise. "And Noodle," Tommy added, as his serpentine companion lazily draped herself across his shoulders. "She's basically a living scarf who occasionally wants snacks. Here, Professor Bluescale, would you like to touch her? She's actually quite smooth." I don't know what possessed me to agree. Perhaps the space mouse incident had temporarily scrambled my survival instincts, but I reached out one trembling hand. Noodle's scales were indeed smooth, and surprisingly warm. She flicked her tongue at me in what Tommy assured us was a friendly gesture, not a taste test. "But how?" Blingle chittered, their mandibles now clicking in curiosity rather than fear. "How did your species manage to form bonds with creatures that could easily end your existence?" "Kindness," Sarah said simply, scratching Mr. Whiskers behind his ears. The fearsome feline responded with that rumbling purr, which suddenly seemed less threatening and more soothing. We showed them kindness, and they showed us loyalty in return. As if to demonstrate this point, Rex padded over to Zoop, who was cautiously descending from the ceiling and sat patiently, tail wagging. After a tense moment, Zoop extended a gaseous tendril. Rex responded by gently licking it, causing Zoop to giggle in surprise. "He tasted my fear," Zoop announced, and responded with affection. One by one, the students began to approach the Earth companions. Mr. Whiskers, having finished showing off his hunting prowess, allowed the gelatinous students to pet him, leaving fur stuck in their translucent forms. Noodle became a hit with the crystalline students, who were fascinated by how their facets reflected in her scales. "I believe," Dean Sparklefrond announced from where they had been observing, their leaves quivering with emotion. "We are witnessing something extraordinary. This is why we wanted Earth students in our program, not despite their differences, but because of them." My scales shifted to a warm purple of agreement as I watched my students, all of my students, bonding over these supposedly dangerous creatures. Rex was now playing fetch with a ball of solidified gas that Zoop had formed. Mr. Whiskers had deigned to demonstrate his superior lounging abilities to a group of admiring gelatinous students. And Noodle, well, Noodle was doing an excellent impression of a sparkly bracelet for one of the crystalline students. "You know," I found myself saying, "perhaps there's something to be learned from the human approach, showing kindness to those we fear, building trust across differences." "Professor," Sarah interrupted gently, "your scales are glowing." She was right. For the first time in my teaching career, my scales had shifted to the rare shade of joy-tinged enlightenment. It was, I had to admit, a rather fetching colour. "Just wait until we bring in our tarantula next week," Tommy whispered to Marcus. My scales immediately shifted back to panic mode, but somehow it didn't feel quite as intense as before. Progress, I supposed, comes in small steps, even if some of those steps have 8 legs. Log date, Galactic Standard Year, 3476, day 134. The Committee for Interspecies Education finally responded to my report about the Companion Species Presentation Day. Their official statement was, and I quote, "Fascinating. Please send more data." Bureaucrats, I swear they're the same across every species. The Academy's policies regarding Earth pets have undergone some rather dramatic revisions. Dean Sparklefrond, still sporting a few leaves that were slightly crumpled from their fainting spell during the tarantula incident, that's another story entirely, has officially designated certain areas as Earth Companion-friendly zones. The most surprising development? We now have a growing waiting list of alien students requesting Earth pets of their own. Zoop has been making inquiries about something called a goldfish, though I suspect they're in for a disappointment when they learn it's not actually made of gold. But perhaps the most unexpected turn of events concerns my own living quarters. You see, Sarah Chen noticed I was spending more time in the classroom observing Mr. Whiskers, purely for academic purposes, of course. She suggested I might enjoy a starter pet of my own. "It's called a hamster," she explained, presenting me with a small containment unit. Much less intimidating than a cat, but still technically a Earth predator. So you can feel brave about it. The creature inside was round, fuzzy, and had the most ridiculously tiny paws I'd ever seen. It stuffed its cheeks with food pellets in a way that reminded me of several Academy administrators I know. "His name is Professor Squeaks," I told my class the next day, my scales turning a rather unprofessional shade of pink with pride. "You named your hamster Professor?" Marcus asked, trying not to laugh. "Well, he does spend an inordinate amount of time running in circles and stuffing his face with Academy-provided nutrients. Sounds like faculty behaviour to me." Even Dean Sparklefrond had to admit I had a point there. So here I am, a respected xenobiology professor, writing this final log entry while a tiny Earth predator sleeps in my desk drawer, in a proper habitat, of course. I'm not completely converted to human recklessness. Professor Squeaks may not strike fear into the hearts of space mice like Mr. Whiskers does, but he's taught me something valuable about humans and their peculiar way of viewing the universe. Perhaps that's the most dangerous thing about humans, not their predator companions or their Deathworld origins, but their ability to make the rest of us question our preconceptions, to show us that sometimes the most remarkable relationships can form between the most unlikely species. Now, if you'll excuse me, Professor Squeaks has woken up and is demanding his evening snack. Yes, I spoil him. No, I don't care what the other faculty members say. End log, PS, note to self. Must remember to ask Sarah what exactly a tarantula is before next week's advanced xenobiology seminar. The way the humans keep grinning about it is making my scales itch.